I discovered my parents had been financially helping my childhood tormentor rebuild his life, while laughing at my failed job interviews. The next morning, I stared at them across the table and asked, "Why help the person who broke me?" And no one answered. I was sitting at the table across from them, the three of us pretending to be a family that enjoyed each other's company. My dad had his usual mug of oversweetened coffee, tapping it with his wedding band out of habit. My mom was buttering toast like she had all the time in the world, smiling faintly. They were talking about the garden, the mulch they'd ordered, and how the backyard would look by spring. Then I asked the question that had been burning inside me all night: why help the person who broke me? Neither of them answered. They didn't look surprised. Just quiet. Almost bored. No one said a word. No one looked at me. That moment will live in my head forever. I'm Elise. I'm 34. I moved back into my parents' house in Lancaster, Pennsylvania about 5 months ago after losing yet another job. I've been in marketing and content strategy for a little over a decade now, bounced around between cities like Pittsburgh, Albany, Chicago. It wasn't always a disaster, but nothing ever lasted long. Sometimes I was laid off. Sometimes it was burnout. A couple of times I was just let go because I wasn't a cultural fit. You know how you tell yourself it's just a bad job market or bad luck? That it's not a reflection of your worth? You try to keep going. But every "thank you for your time" email chips away at you until you even start to wonder if maybe you're the problem. My parents never said much when I failed. Not directly. But their disappointment lingered in everything: how they offered me an air mattress in the den instead of helping me clear out my old room, how they introduced me to their friends with a faint sigh before saying, "Elise is between jobs right now." It was the way my mom smiled too tightly when I cooked dinner, or how my dad barely acknowledged me at breakfast. I didn't move home to be coddled, I really didn't. I moved because I had nowhere else to go. I told myself it was temporary. I'd find work, get back on my feet, move out quietly. No drama. But then, one night about a week ago, I couldn't sleep. I was scrolling through job boards in the den when I heard laughter from the kitchen. It was late, almost midnight, and the sound was unusually loud. I got up, quietly, not even sure why. I wasn't trying to snoop. I just felt something off in their tone. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard my name. And she told the interviewer she led a whole campaign. My mom snorted, that high-pitched nasal laugh I used to hate as a teenager. She was a junior analyst. I mean, come on. My dad chuckled. Delusional sometimes. But hey, at least Dax is actually trying. I froze. Dax. That name hadn't entered my thoughts in over a decade. But hearing it now was like swallowing ice. Dax Morley. The one person in my life I actively tried to forget. If you grew up being relentlessly tormented by one specific person, you know that kind of name doesn't fade. It stays buried in your nervous system. He was the boy who made me hate waking up for school. Back in middle and high school, Dax had made it his life's mission to humiliate me. He was clever in that cruel way that makes it hard for adults to notice. When I got glasses, he called me Four Eyes, nothing original, but he made it stick. When I wore a retainer, he mimicked my lisp in front of a crowd. He'd leave anonymous notes in my locker calling me names, used my photo for memes back when MySpace was still a thing, and once posted a rumor online that I had a thing with a teacher. I was 14. And he never got in trouble. Ever. Teachers called it drama. My parents told me to ignore him. My mother once actually said, "Boys only tease girls they like." Let me be very clear, Dax ruined my self-confidence. I was in therapy for 3 years because of him. I developed anxiety, a mild eating disorder, and I didn't go to prom. I didn't even walk at graduation. And I left Lancaster the second I could, swearing I'd never come back. So to hear my parents not only talking to him, but helping him? Financially? It made me sick. The next morning I acted normal. I watched them closely, waiting for one of them to say something. Maybe they'd bring up Dax again, maybe they'd explain. They didn't. So I asked, why help the person who broke me? My mom blinked at me like she didn't understand the question. My dad shifted in his chair, picked up his coffee, and didn't meet my eyes. That silence lasted maybe 8 seconds. It felt like a full hour. Eventually, my mom said, he apologized. To you? I asked. Did he ever say anything to me? She looked away. He was a kid, Elise. So was I. I was a kid when I cried myself to sleep every night because of him. My dad tried to stay neutral. He's not that person anymore. I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because it was too absurd not to. You gave him money. A lot, from what I heard. While I'd been here living like a ghost in your den. Sleeping on a deflating air mattress while you helped the guy who carved slut into my locker. He needed help, my mom said sharply. He was homeless at one point. He's starting his own business now. He's working hard. I didn't say another word. I just walked out. I packed my laptop, my essentials, and checked into a cheap hotel. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. I just felt like I'd been erased. I've been here at the hotel for 4 days now. I haven't gone back to the house. I've been applying to jobs from a sticky desk next to a vending machine. I got a call back for an interview yesterday. It was the first one in weeks. I didn't tell my parents. On the second day, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went to Dax's business website. Morley Lawn and Stone. Photos of landscaping work, some cheesy testimonials, a headshot of him in a polo shirt. He looked the same, just older. That smug smile still sitting on his face like nothing had ever happened. And I did something else I probably shouldn't have done. I emailed him. The email wasn't angry, exactly. It was cold. Careful. I spent 20 minutes writing it and another 2 hours debating whether to send it. Subject: You may not remember. Hi Dax, I'm Elise, from Lampeter Strasbourg. Hi. You probably do remember me. I wanted you to know that I recently found out my parents have been financially helping you. I've also overheard them laughing about my job situation while praising your efforts. I'm reaching out because I want to know, do you remember what you did to me? Not vaguely. Not a kids will be kids gloss over. I mean the specific, relentless oppress. The rumors. The locker graffiti. The anonymous posts. The things that drove me to years of therapy. Do you remember any of that? That's all I want to know. Elise. I hit send. And I waited. I didn't expect a reply. I figured he'd ignore it, or worse, respond with some fake, sanitized apology that made it about him. Instead, a reply came 3 hours later. Subject: You may not remember. Elise, I remember. Not everything, but enough. I remember the notes, the names, the locker. I remember making you cry once during a group project and laughing about it in the hallway after. I remember mimicking your voice. I remember doing things that, looking back, make me feel sick. I don't have an excuse. My home life was bad, but that doesn't justify what I did. I know your parents have been helping me, and I never asked them to. They offered. They said you and they weren't very close these days and that you had moved on. I never wanted to involve them in this. I'm sorry. I truly am. I don't expect forgiveness. Dax. It was jarring. I sat on the edge of the bed, rereading his message again and again, trying to figure out if it was sincere or performative. I still couldn't decide. What hit me the hardest wasn't even his apology. It was what he said about my parents, that they told him I had moved on, that we weren't close. That detail wasn't something he could have guessed. That came from them. My own parents had rewritten our story to a man who spent years tearing me apart. I didn't reply. Not to him. Not yet. I also didn't return home. Instead, I started spending my afternoons walking around the park near the Lancaster Central Market. It was the only place I remembered leaking from my childhood. The place hadn't changed, it still smelled of warm pretzels and smoked meats, and the cobblestone sidewalks clicked under my shoes like a rhythm I'd forgotten. A part of me wanted to confront them again. To go home and lay everything out, their betrayal, the shame I felt, the emotional gymnastics it took to survive that house after everything. But what would that do? Would they listen this time? Would they even understand? They had seen my childhood pain up close. They were there when I came home crying. They were the ones who took me to my first therapist at 15, even though they never followed up. They'd watched it happen and still convinced themselves he'd changed, that he was trying. And maybe he had changed. I don't know. But I hadn't. Not yet. I still felt like the girl they didn't believe in. Not when I needed them. Not even now. I didn't block their numbers, but I muted the family group chat. My mom texted once on the second day, "We're worried about you. Please let us know if you're okay." My dad sent a separate message a day later, "This is an overreaction, Elise. Don't shut us out over a mistake." A mistake. That was what he called it. Not a betrayal. Not a breach of trust. Just a casual misstep, like forgetting to pick someone up from the airport. I ignored them both. Instead, I wrote in my journal. I walked more. I kept applying to jobs. I reminded myself that I didn't need their version of support, or any support from people who viewed my trauma as an inconvenience. But I couldn't let it go completely. Not yet. One night, I drove past our house. Just once. The lights were on in the living room. My mom's silhouette hovered near the window, she was holding something, maybe a photo. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept driving. Later that night, I wrote a letter. Not to send, not yet, but just to write it down. You helped the boy who wrecked me because you saw him as a victim. You couldn't see me that way. You thought I was strong enough to survive without help. You were wrong. It's been 5 days now. I'm still at the hotel. And I've started thinking about what a new kind of life would look like, one where I stop waiting for my parents to be the people I needed them to be, and start building something without their approval at all. Not revenge. Just distance. But something still tethers me to this mess. Maybe it's the fact that they haven't tried harder. That they haven't shown up at the hotel or begged me to talk or even acknowledged what this truly meant. Maybe it's because some part of me still wants them to choose me. Not the convenient version of me. Not the obedient daughter. The real me, the one they ignored, mocked, and let down. And I don't know if they ever will. The interview I had lined up was scheduled for Thursday morning, and as much as I tried to push my personal drama to the back of my mind, it clung to me like fog. I sat in the waiting room of a boutique digital marketing firm just outside downtown Lancaster, trying to convince myself I was composed. I had done the prep, reviewed their client list, printed my resume on the good paper, but inside, my stomach was doing somersaults. Not just because I needed the job, though I absolutely did, but because I couldn't stop hearing my parents' voices, the mocking tone, the derisive chuckles I hadn't been meant to hear. That laugh had broken something inside me. Something small but fundamental. Something I hadn't yet figured out how to patch. The interview itself went well. Surprisingly well, in fact. The hiring manager, a woman named Josette, seemed kind. She even mentioned my writing portfolio and said she liked my conversational tone. I left the office feeling capable. Maybe even worthy. It was the first time in months I'd felt something close to hope. But then I made the mistake of checking my phone. Another message from my mother: "We don't know what more you want from us. You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I stared at it for a long time in my parked car, the engine humming under my feet. The gas light had just flicked on. Figures. I didn't even have enough fuel to drive aimlessly and process it. Everything felt like a metaphor lately. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I drove to a quiet lot behind the old public library and sat there for over an hour, just watching people go in and out of the building. Some of them were kids, arms full of books, earbuds in, talking and laughing like nothing in the world could possibly go wrong. I wondered what it would have felt like to have a childhood where I didn't dread being seen. A childhood where walking into school didn't feel like entering a courtroom. I didn't want to be that person anymore, the one stuck in memory loops, the one defined by trauma. But I also couldn't pretend that what my parents did, and continued to justify, was something I could just bury. I wanted accountability. Or at the very least, honesty. Instead, I had silence. That night, back at the hotel, I sat down and opened a blank document. I'd decided I needed to write everything out. Not as a letter, this time. Not for them. For me. I needed to see the whole thing laid out, the events, the feelings, the small betrayals that added up to this massive break. I needed to make sense of it. To name the things no one else had been willing to acknowledge. So I wrote. I wrote about the time I came home with a split lip in 7th grade because Dax had accidentally bumped me into the bleachers. About the way my mom said, "Well, maybe if you didn't provoke him." I wrote about the night I told my dad I was afraid to go back to school and he just sighed and said, "The world isn't going to get easier, Elise. Better toughen up now." I wrote about therapy, the years of trying to understand why I never felt protected in my own home. How I thought if I could just be better, smarter, quieter, more agreeable, they might see me differently. Love me differently. I wrote about hearing them laugh at me in the kitchen. That one still felt the worst. Because it wasn't about Dax, not really. It was about how little they respected me. How they viewed me as a disappointment instead of someone trying, desperately, to survive. By midnight, I had 12 pages of raw, unfiltered memories and reflections. It didn't fix anything, but it helped me breathe. The next morning, I finally replied to my mom's text. I kept it short. You helped someone who hurt me and laughed at my failures. I'm not making this bigger than it is, I'm finally seeing it for what it's always been. She didn't reply. But later that afternoon, there was a knock on my hotel room door. I froze. I hadn't told them where I was staying. I was almost certain of that. I peered through the peephole, and sure enough, there they were. My parents. Both of them. My dad stood with his hands in his pockets. My mom was holding a manila folder, for some reason. Maybe paperwork. Maybe something symbolic. I didn't open the door immediately. I stood there, letting them wait, wondering if they'd get tired and leave. They didn't. Eventually, I cracked the door and stepped halfway into the hallway. No hug. No smile. My mother was the first to speak. We wanted to explain. I looked at her. Then at my dad. I don't want explanations, I said quietly. I want honesty. My dad shifted on his feet. Then come downstairs. We'll talk. Or yell. Or whatever you need. I considered slamming the door. But something in me, curiosity, maybe, told me to listen. Just once. We sat in the small lounge near the vending machines. The carpet smelled like damp cardboard, and the lights buzzed faintly. My dad looked old at that moment, older than I'd ever seen him. My mom looked tense, like someone holding a truth that didn't want to be shared. We didn't realize how much it would hurt you, she said. You didn't realize helping the person who bullied your daughter for years might hurt her? I asked. It wasn't that simple, my dad said. Dax came to us a few years ago. He was a mess. We saw someone trying to change. You saw a project, I corrected. He didn't deny it. We felt helpless with you, my mom said suddenly. You'd move, get a new job, then fall again. We never knew how to help you. And with him, he was grateful. I laughed bitterly. So you chose the one who said thank you. There it was, the real truth. They hadn't picked him instead of me. They picked the version of someone who made them feel useful. I wasn't useful. I was their reflection. And I reminded them of all the ways they'd failed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the silence speak for me. Letting them sit in discomfort for once. "We're sorry," my mom said finally, the words brittle in her mouth. "We thought, maybe if he changed, it would make up for the past." "It doesn't," I said. "It never will." They nodded. Neither argued. We sat like that for a long time. And then I stood. "I'm not coming home," I told them. And I meant it. They didn't try to stop me when I stood up. My dad exhaled, that long, weary kind of sigh that meant he was giving up on trying to convince me of anything. My mom looked like she wanted to say something else but couldn't quite get it out. Maybe the realization had finally landed. Or maybe she just didn't have the energy to argue anymore. I walked away without another word, back to my hotel room, and shut the door behind me. Once I was alone, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the wall, waiting for some kind of emotional response to hit me, relief, grief, rage, but it didn't come. Not in the way I expected. It wasn't a wave. It was more like a slow thaw. Just this dull, humming awareness that something permanent had shifted. That visit didn't fix anything. It didn't rebuild trust. It didn't undo years of damage or change the fact that they had made choices, recent ones, that showed where their loyalty really lived. But it gave me clarity. They had chosen what was easier. What was cleaner. What gave them the illusion of being needed, of being good. And I was tired of asking to be chosen. 2 days later, I heard back from the job. I got it. It wasn't a glamorous position, content coordinator for a mid-sized firm focused on small businesses, but it paid enough, had benefits, and most importantly, it was mine. Earned. Not gifted. Not helped along. Mine. When I got the call, I actually had to hold the phone away from my face for a second and just stare at it. I'd stopped believing good news was even real anymore. But I said thank you, confirmed the offer, and immediately began looking for a studio to rent. I couldn't stay in the hotel forever. I found a small place above a bookstore just 10 minutes from the office. The landlord was an older woman named Mrs. Barton who gave me a modest discount after I helped her carry groceries up the stairs. The apartment was cramped, with slanted ceilings and ancient windows that whistled in the wind, but it had character. And best of all, no ghosts. No reminders of who I used to be. No history stuck in the walls. Just space. Just breathe. I didn't tell my parents about the job. Or the move. I figured if they wanted to know about my life, they could ask without conditions or expectations. They could ask because they cared, not because they wanted to feel like they were a part of something they hadn't really earned the right to be part of anymore. Dax never emailed again. I kept his message unread in a separate folder in my inbox, tucked away like a relic. I didn't forgive him, not because I was incapable of it, but because forgiveness wasn't owed. Especially not when the pain was so deeply tied to identity, to those fragile years where you're still figuring out who you are. I thought about replying. I even drafted a response more than once, something measured and direct. But every time, I'd reread his apology, and that line would echo in my head: they said you and they weren't very close these days and that you had moved on. The assumption. The dismissal. The ease with which my parents had summed up our strained relationship to the person who caused it, or at least, catalyzed it. It made me feel small all over again. So I left it alone. Let his words stay in the dark. In the following weeks, I settled into my new place. I hung a few thrifted frames. Bought cheap furniture secondhand. Got a little electric kettle and made it a ritual to have tea every night after work. It felt peaceful. Foreign, but peaceful. I still walked past my parents' neighborhood sometimes, not out of longing, but out of habit. It was on the way to the grocery store. I'd glance at the house, same yellow shutters, same ceramic frog on the porch, and feel this hollow detachment. Like visiting a museum of a life that wasn't mine anymore. They texted, now and then. Usually vague updates: Uncle Derek is having surgery next week. We had snow early this year. Gardens ruined. We donated some of your old books, hope that's okay. Never anything about what had happened. Never anything real. Once, my mom sent me a picture of the backyard. It looked well kept. Clean. Dax's company did the spring cleanup. Looks good, right? That was the only time I responded with more than a one-word answer. I'd rather not hear about him. No reply. Just read receipts. I'd expected more pushback, if I'm being honest. More defensiveness, maybe even an argument. But there was nothing. Just silence. Like they were finally starting to understand that there were parts of my life they didn't get to be part of anymore. One evening, I ran into a former classmate, Nia, at a bookstore event. She looked different, more confident than I remembered. She had been quiet in school, always sitting near the back, head down. We'd never been close, but we recognized each other immediately. We talked for a bit. She asked what brought me back to Lancaster, and I gave the abbreviated version: job change, needed a reset. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then, without prompting, she said, I always thought what Day did to you was horrible. I will never forget it. It caught me off guard. I hadn't even mentioned him. I used to feel guilty when I didn't say anything back then, she added. But I was scared of him too. It hit me harder than I expected, that someone else had seen. That I hadn't been invisible, after all. I told her it meant a lot to hear. And it really did. We exchanged numbers and made plans to meet for coffee. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in what I remembered. The days passed quietly. I started to feel a rhythm again. Wake up, work, walk home. Brew tea. Write a little. Some evenings I'd sit by the window and watch the street lights flicker on, one by one. The world felt softer from up here. Distant, but not cruel. Every now and then, a part of me still flinched at loud laughter in a cafe or overheard whispers. I still had the reflexes of a girl who'd learned to expect the worst. But slowly, those instincts began to ease. Still, something about my parents lingered. Not because I wanted reconciliation, not really, but because I hadn't quite figured out how to grieve what I'd lost. Or maybe, what I'd never really had to begin with. Because the truth was, I'd always wanted to believe we were closer than we were. It was a few weeks into my new job when the opportunity for closure, real closure, unexpectedly landed in my lap. We had just onboarded a new client, a local landscaping business looking to rebrand and expand into nearby counties. It was a modest account, but the boss wanted to offer small businesses full-service packages, web design, marketing strategy, social media revamps. I didn't think anything of it when the client's intake file hit my desk. Until I saw the name, Morley Lawn and Stone. At first, I thought it was a joke. Then I saw the photo in the company overview, Dax. The same awkward polo headshot from his website. Except now he was a paying client, and we were the ones rebuilding his image. I just sat there, blinking at the screen, trying to figure out how the universe had brought me here of all places. It wasn't rage I felt. Not fear either. It was an opportunity. Technically, he had no idea I worked here. The initial contact was done through an online form. The project had been assigned to me through normal rotation. I could have asked to be reassigned. Could have passed it off, said I had a conflict. But instead, I opened a new project folder and started outlining his brand audit. I didn't hamper anything. That would have been too easy, and too petty. Besides, I wanted something better. I wanted the kind of revenge that wouldn't unravel his business, but would leave a lasting impression. Something that would remind him, and my parents, that I wasn't the broken girl anymore. I was the one in charge now. The first time I called Dax for the brand consultation, I didn't use video. I just introduced myself as Elise from the agency and said I'd be his project lead. He didn't recognize my voice at first. He was cheerful, borderline chatty. He talked about how hard he'd worked to turn things around, how proud he was of what he'd built. He sounded confident. I let him talk. Then I said, very calmly, just so we're clear, you do remember me, right? There was a long pause. Wait. Elise, he said, his voice suddenly hollow. Yes, I said. That Elise. Another pause. I didn't know, God, I didn't know you worked there. I do, I replied. And now I'm the one in charge of how your brand is seen by the world. He didn't say anything right away. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. I didn't mean for this to be, it's not personal, I interrupted. This is business. You're a client. I'll treat you like one. And I meant it. I kept the calls professional. Delivered polished work. Gave feedback where it was needed. Helped him refine his messaging. Built out a clean, confident website. But I didn't stop there. As part of the package, I also developed a social campaign that focused heavily on company origin stories, authentic narratives about how the business came to be, what it overcame, and what made it trustworthy. Dax, being eager for exposure, approved everything I proposed. So I wrote up a story for the site, about a man who had made mistakes. Who'd hurt people. Who was given undeserved second chances. Who still had a long way to go in earning forgiveness, but who was committed to proving he could be more than the sum of his worst moments. It was vague enough not to name me. But it didn't need to. It put him under a microscope in a way that made people ask questions. I crafted every word to walk that fine line, sincere, but unsettling. The post went viral in our little town. People started sharing it. A few comments popped up on his socials from classmates we both knew. Some were supportive. Others weren't. One woman wrote, "Takes a lot to admit that. But it takes more to ask the person you hurt if they're okay now." Another, "Funny how we never hear the victim's version of these redemption arcs. The real cherry on top?" A week later, a local online magazine that sometimes featured small business stories reached out for a follow-up interview on Dax's transparent approach to leadership. He asked if I'd help him draft responses. So I did. Carefully. Subtly. And when the article published, it included this line, "While Dax admits to a troubled past, he acknowledges that not everyone he hurt owes him forgiveness, and that some wounds don't heal just because he's changed." He didn't fight that sentence. He let it go in. Because he knew who it was about. A few days after the article went live, I got an email. From Dax. "I know I don't deserve your time. But I wanted to say thank you for how you handled everything. You didn't owe me anything. You didn't use your position to humiliate me. And honestly, that makes what I did back then feel even worse. You won. Not in a petty way. But in the real way. I hope you're doing okay." I didn't reply. Because I didn't need to. But I wasn't finished yet. A few weeks later, after I'd fully moved into my apartment and settled into the job, I invited my parents over. Just once. They were hesitant. My mom asked twice, "Are you sure?" I said yes. I wanted them to see me now. My space. My life. On my terms. When they arrived, I greeted them politely. No hug, but no hostility. I gave them a tour of the small apartment, showed them the tiny balcony with the flower boxes I'd planted, and poured them some tea. They sat stiffly, clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop. It did. "I wanted you to see what I built," I said calmly. "I didn't need your money. I didn't need your advice. I needed your support. And when I didn't get it, I figured it out anyway." They didn't say much. My dad nodded, unreadable. My mom looked down at her mug. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. But before they left, I walked them to the door and handed them a folder. Inside was a printout of the article about Dax. I said, "This is the man you invested in." My mom glanced at it, brow furrowing. "Is this supposed to?" "No," I said. "It's just so you understand that I didn't need revenge to win. I just needed to be in a position where you could finally see what you missed." They left quietly. That was the last time I saw them in person. We still email occasionally. Shallow things. No apologies. No real reckoning. And that's okay. Because I'm no longer looking backward, waiting for them to change. I changed. I took everything they gave to someone else, every ounce of support, trust, belief, and gave it to myself instead. And it was more than enough.